Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Patricia Tenen with Kentucky Youth Advocates, and we're really excited to see everybody here today. While we're waiting for everyone to join, we'd love to hear from you in the chat feature. Really curious about your cicada experience so far. Good, bad, mediocre? I know I can speak from my experience. I hear them every once in a while, but haven't had one land on me yet. So thanks for everybody for joining. You can keep filling that in, what your experience with those cicadas are. And just as a heads up to everybody, we are recording today's forum to share later as both a video and as a podcast. So we're going to ask that you stay muted, but we will take questions and comments via the chat feature. And even if we don't get to those, if we don't have the time today, we'll try to answer those as we go, but if not, we'll follow up in an email like we always do. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Terry Brooks.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to, I believe, Partner Forum 54. So we're getting up there. As we always do, we want to welcome those of you who have been to every one of these, and we also especially want to welcome folks for whom this might be the very first one. So we're delighted to have you. We also want to thank, as we always do, Aetna. Their sponsorship of this forum is what makes it possible, and so we appreciate their partnership. So if you look behind Christa Bell on your screen, you will see a big sign that says May is National Foster Care Month. And this is not in any way picking on Christa Bell, because we are honoring May as National Foster Care Month. And can I tell you that that drives me crazy? Just like April, and we were right in the middle of celebrating Child Abuse Prevention Month, that drives me crazy. Just like in April, it was Fair Housing Month, and we were in the middle of it. That drives me crazy, because you and I both know the tendency, right? Is we're going to talk about foster care during May, and now that we've solved that, we'll move on to whatever is June's month. So I know that the folks joining this call know better than that. None of you suspect for a moment that foster care is something to be dealt with during May and then forgotten about. And that's really what a number of forums around this month are about. So thanks for being here. When we look at foster care, I think there's two or three things that I just want to mention, and then I'll be quiet and we can move on to the real experts who are on the panel. First of all, we understand that you cannot talk about young people in the child welfare system without talking about broader systems, economic well-being, health, education achievement, maltreatment. So let's make sure that we don't try to make this some siloed policy issue, because if we do, we may get nibbling on the edges, but we're not going to get genuine reform when it comes to child welfare. The second thing that I think is so important is to hold sort of a now and later focus. So the now focus has to be, what is the best placement for kids currently? And I need to say that Christa, the commissioner, Secretary Friedlander, any number of folks in the administration are continuing a positive trend line where we look at that full spectrum, from prevention to residential care to kinship care to foster care. And again, I think it's so important that we always talk about that full spectrum. So foster care is absolutely vital, but its interaction with those other pieces of the spectrum are critical. But the real focus of today, in many ways, is what happens when that young person leaves the child welfare system. What happens when they get out of state care? And we know what that means. All of you know what that means. That transition at best is a magical mystery tour. At worst, it's a pathway to a really bad future existence of poverty or incarceration or addiction. And we've got to change that narrative. A key force in changing that narrative for almost a decade has been True Up. True Up is a movement that was initiated by Louisville businessman and philanthropist Frank Harshaw. Frank is very public in saying that probably more than a half century ago, he was in the child welfare system when he was growing up. And he would tell you today that except for an amazing break where he got paired with the right adults, that he may not have had the very successful career that he had. And Frank's intent is to make sure that young people aging out of the system, that they don't have to depend on winning the lottery of life, that it doesn't have to be accidental or circumstantial, that we can be intentional, that we can invent policies and processes to ensure that every young person exiting state care has a future that is promising and filled with potential. And that's what today is all about. So we're really delighted that Mr. Harshaw and Nikki Thornton, who is executive director of True Up, are coming under the KY umbrella, kind of becoming a really important part of several of our initiatives. So Nikki, we want to make sure you know how happy we are that we're creating some synergy with this issue. We also know that you have spent more than a few years being a voice and a champion for young people, trying to make sure that they themselves have voice in their experience. So thanks for what you do. We have a terrific panel today, and I think Nikki is now going to take it away. So Ms. Thornton, the forum is yours.
Thank you, Terry. And I'm so excited to be here today, and so really excited to see so many participants with us. I know that we do this work together. I know that it does take a village, for our young people to feel supported and for us to feel like we are helping them in those accomplishments. So I know that not one organization, not one individual alone can do this work. So we really appreciate, the attendance today. I'm really, really excited to see this number here. Well, as Terry said, we have a fabulous panel for you today. We are in for a treat with this panel. We're going to be speaking about fostering teens, foster homes for teens. We really wanted to be intentional to speak about this particular group, and I'm excited for what we're going to hear, what we're going to learn, what's going to be shared in the chat as you participate today. And so let's jump right into some introductions of our panel. We have Christa Bell, and I'm going to have you all introduce yourselves, please. But we have Christa Bell, we have Sarah Stalker, and we have Kelly Pullen. So in that order, please share with us just a little bit about your work.
Good morning, I'm Christa Bell. I am an executive advisor with the Department for Community-Based Services in Kentucky. I have worked in child welfare for a little more than 24 years, most of that time in the area of foster care and adoption. I now serve as an executive advisor in the DCBS Commissioner's Office with a focus on prevention, but very excited to be here today. This is a conversation that is very close to my heart.
Good morning, my name is Sarah Stalker. I am a DCBS foster family parent, but I always say we're a foster family because it's not just me opening my home. I have a husband and two biological children who are 17 and almost 13. And we have been fostering for almost 6 years. We started off fostering kiddos right about the age of our children at that time, and which at the time was like 7 and 11, but as our kiddos have gotten older, we realized that actually teenagers is really an important segment of the foster care population that we really want to focus on. So typically we only have older kiddos, and by older I mean 12 and up. And I will kick it over to Kelly.
Hello, good morning. I am Kelly Pullen. I'm presently the Executive Director of the SKY program at Aetna Better Health of Kentucky. And prior to joining Aetna, I worked in the private provider space, serving children and youth that were impacted by the child welfare and juvenile justice systems for about 13 years. I'm an LCSW by training, a fierce child advocate, and just so excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much. And I do believe that Eltuan Dawson has also joined us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eltuan Dawson. I'm 26 years old. I am a former foster youth. I work with Miss Nikki at True Up Louisville, and I am working to become a youth development trainer.
Thank you, Eltuan. So we have some questions that we would like to ask, some that I will direct to our panelists specifically, and then some that'll be open conversation, and we'll just get various feedback, experiences, so we can all have a broader enlightenment from different perspectives. Christa, I'm going to start with you. How many children over age 12 and over, are waiting for foster care placements? And then what are those requirements for anyone that's on the call today, anyone who wants to share with their networks? What are those requirements to be eligible to become a foster parent?
Sure, those are great questions, and I'm actually going to answer them in the opposite order that you asked. So the requirements to become a foster or adoptive parent is that you have to be 21 years of age. You can be single or married. You have to be financially stable, so have an income that is separate from foster care. You have to be able to provide a safe home environment and have bedroom space for an additional child or more. And then there are some training requirements, and of course passing a background check with regard to criminal history. And I will, when I'm finished speaking, I will put a link in the chat to what those requirements are for DCBS. There's also therapeutic foster care in the state through the private agencies, and there are some additional requirements for therapeutic foster care in terms of training, but the basic requirements are really similar, whether you're seeking to be approved as a DCBS foster parent or a therapeutic foster parent. With regard to the youth over age 12 who are in need of foster homes, at any given time, it is really only a handful of youth for whom we are actively seeking placement in a foster home that are awaiting that placement, meaning that they are in a different level of care, say residential treatment or in a hospital, or sometimes we have youth that are in detention for whom we are unable to find a home. And even though those numbers are relatively small, at any given time, sometimes it takes days or even weeks to find a foster home that will accept those youth and meet those needs. So for those handful of youth that are in those situations, that is a really challenging time. So the numbers aren't big, but the experience of those youth while they're waiting to be placed in a family setting is really challenging and critical. So I'm not sure that we can measure that in numbers, but by the experience of the youth. I think what is even a greater challenge, though, is that we don't have as many foster families that are willing to accept older youth as younger youth. And so what happens is that when an older youth enters care, and we're seeking a foster family, rather than having 5 to 10 options that could be considered to find the best fit for that youth, we may have only one family that has said yes, and that may be completely across the state. And so that youth loses that connection with their community, the proximity to their family, their friends, their schools. And so again, sometimes we can find a family, but we don't have all of the options that we have for younger youth. And it really does have negative consequences for those older youth when they have to leave their home communities in order to be placed in a foster home.
Thank you, Christa. Really appreciate that overview, because there's so many sections, pre-independent living, independent living. And so to be able to, explain the reasons why we still have those type of programmings, being that many people are looking for those smaller, younger children. Sarah, I want to segue right into a question for you here, being that you are a foster parent and have been for several years, as you shared. What is that process like to become a foster parent? How do we encourage anyone on the call and their networks to become foster parents? What's that look like?
So I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. Are you wanting to know what process we had to go through to officially open up?
Yes, because you specifically are supporting those teen placements. And so I think it'd be important for everyone on the call to understand, high level, what that process looks like. People may think it's very intimidating, but we want to today encourage our foster homes, placements for our teens, and just want to see if you can maybe, in an honest way, but also in an encouraging way, explain why you've continued for 6 years and think it's important.
So I'll give you a little bit from a couple of different angles. I know Christa had mentioned what the requirements were from a training perspective. Now, like I said, we've been open for almost 6 years. So I know there have been some changes throughout the years as far as the hours that are required. I believe when we did it, it was about 30 hours of in-person training. And I think that has changed now to about 15. Christa, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. And then I believe there's some, things that you can do online. I remember having a home study, so social worker coming to my home, looking through my, personal, belongings, just opening closets and doors, asking questions, making sure that it's a safe environment. And I'm like, have at it, right? Because I want to make sure, I want them to make sure that every home that they're going into is safe, getting fingerprinted, background checked. And then doing an interview about, what kind of kiddos that we felt like we could welcome into our home. And those questions range everything from, the age of the child you're willing to accept. Are you willing to accept a sibling group, multiple placements? We have a lot of families, at least within DCBS, because I'm a DCBS home, so I can't speak to other agencies, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, what their, makeup is. But I know we are on a shortage of people who will take sibling groups as well as older teens, but also down to race and gender. And then, I don't believe we were asked this at the time, but I'm sure it's a question that might be asked more so now, is also around our LGBTQ community, which is probably the fastest growing population of children coming into foster care and also experiencing homelessness. So that's something we really need to be highly aware of and working on. So, for us, like I mentioned before, we were starting with kids around the same age because it was like, stick with kind of what you know. And it was probably about 4 years ago that we had a call on a kiddo who was maybe a year older than our son at the time. So I think she was 14 and our son was 13. And it was the first time that we had said yes to a kiddo that was older. And it was one of the best experiences we had probably ever had. So fast forward, just to today, was just texting with her the other day. She was going to come over and have lunch. So even though she's not in our care, we still keep in touch with her. She was with us for about 17 months. So, is it hard? Yes, it's hard. Is it rewarding? Yes, absolutely. I always say to folks, foster families are no different than biological families. There's really great ones out there. There's ones that probably shouldn't be operating, and then everything in between. And kids are hard. So I don't care what the age is. It's hard. And I've run the spectrum. We're fortunate enough to have 2 biological children of our own. And I mentioned their ages, so almost 13 and one that just turned 17. And so I've had the opportunity to go through all those ages and stages. And I get why people are intimidated because it's kind of, you just don't know. They're bigger people. They have their own, opinions and thoughts, and they're going to maybe push back. And I think that can seem really intimidating to people, especially if you've never maybe had children of your own and have gone through those ages and stages. And some of those are myths and some of them aren't, right? It's kind of like, you know, I'm sure there's no one on this call that hasn't participated in some sort of activity in your younger years that are also the same activities that make people a little nervous or hesitant about fostering older youth, you know? So those can be things like sex, cell phones, social media, driving, attitude, right? Like all of these wonderful things that we've all probably participated in at some level in our life, but it's super, it's super rewarding, and it's really terrifying how many kiddos, you know, are aging out. I know, Christa, you weren't able to maybe give a hard number about how many kids 12 and up, but I know in my years and conversations, I know that I think, at least within Jefferson County, 90% of our foster homes are looking for kiddos that are 5 and younger. And then I think out of that, it's like 80% are 0 to 2. So all of a sudden, you know, 6 is the new 16. And I think that's something that we need to be talking about. So how do we even back it up and look at how to really get to kids before they're at 16, because by the time they're 16, we know the outcomes just aren't good as far as them getting, you know, maybe reunified with their biological parent or maybe even adopted. And then you're looking at kids aging out. So if there's something specific that you want me to hit on that I didn't, let me know. Otherwise, I'll pause and give somebody else an opportunity.
Sarah, that was great. Thank you for that overview from all those experiences and just for the honesty that whether it be a youth that's in foster care or biological youth, there's going to be, you know, different situations that come up that we deal with as we would with any youth. But thank you for sharing. You spoke a little bit about the myths, and I wanted to bring Eltuan into the conversation. You know, some of those potential myths that people may have around teens, you know, fostering teens. But Eltuan, I want to ask you to help us to better understand, you know, what are those positive opportunities, as Sarah talked about? You know, it's important work. And what are those positive opportunities that potential foster parents need to know, you know, about our teens?
Absolutely. Our young people are just constantly, we know that we are constantly growing and evolving. Us now and our young people now. So we can definitely resonate with that. But to be compassionate and understanding in that also makes the difference. This answers some of the other questions that we had earlier. To engage with these young people, we have to move more compassionately, because our young people are under a lot of pressure in their transitions. There are many transitions, and they need understanding, and they need consistent adult support. And to provide them options for positive decision making can lead them into that positive decision making. You mentioned relationships, Sarah, and sex even for our young people. There's a specific training called Love Notes, and that teaches them and gives them the option to choose positive actions as they move forward in their relationships with their peers. That's teaching them to set boundaries. That's teaching him, just providing the option for positive decision making instead of being that afraid because you've done the same thing. Your experience might be different from their experience, and we just have to let them grow supportively.
Thank you, Eltuan. You know, we build relationships, so thank you so much for emphasizing that piece. Kelly, I want to bring you into the conversation here because I feel like with Aetna, you know, I want to ask about specific recruitment strategies that you are doing to target foster parents, and then what are those supports, you know, for teens particularly that Aetna is utilizing so that those placements can remain stable.
Sure. So from, you know, a recruitment perspective, Aetna is not an entity, right, that's licensing our foster parents. And so our strategies really around recruitment are more of support and collaboration and advocacy alongside of our partners at DCBS and those private provider agencies, I apologize, who are seeking to recruit parents to take care of some of those therapeutic children that we have in the state. So we're really, standing shoulder to shoulder with these providers, with the cabinet, and evaluating what are some of the barriers to parents becoming licensed to foster children in the state. What are some of those barriers and challenges from a retention perspective as well? And really bringing everybody together and facilitating those conversations to start to think through some innovative solutions to address what we all know is a lack of having able parents in the foster system to take care of our older youth. And particularly with the retention efforts, Aetna is leading a training collaborative throughout the state. That includes our partners at the state, but also a lot of community-based organizations and advocacy groups like KYA. And we're really helping to expand access to these necessary trainings that help to bolster everyone's experience, right, and expertise in serving older youth. So we're excited to be partnering with teams like KYA and the Bounce Coalition to roll out training on ACEs. We're rolling out training on trauma-informed care. We also are rolling out some training on transition-aged youth and really pulling together all of the resources that we have in the state, not just even from Aetna, and helping these parents understand what's available, right, for an older youth in the system, and helping our youth understand that. We're excited to be partnering with Mary Hurst in the next couple of weeks to roll out a training that's a Medicaid 101 training that's targeted towards our older foster youth that are getting ready to transition out, so they understand what is the Medicaid system, how do I navigate that system, how do I get the supports and services that we need. So those are some of the initiatives from a training perspective, but I think one thing that's really important also from a retention aspect, we know that there are perceived challenges with serving older populations, and we've got some challenges in our state in terms of funding and making sure that these children have the services that they need to keep them in a community level setting. And so again, we're excited to be collaborating with the state because we are able to engage in some creative funding initiatives to where we can wrap additional supports and services around these kids to keep them in a community setting and to keep them in a home. One thing that we're getting ready to embark on, all of our nurse care managers here at Aetna are getting certified in high fidelity wraparound. And so when we've got really complex kids that we're serving in our most acute tier of care management, we're going to be able to increase that capacity and be able to provide hi-fi wrap to our kids, to our families, most importantly, so we can maintain our children in that setting and make sure that everyone has what they need to be successful.
Thank you for sharing some good information there, Kelly. Thank you so much. I'm going to go into a couple of more specialized questions and discussion. I want to talk a little bit about what Sarah had mentioned in terms of disproportionality. And I want to, the whole group, please give us some insight here on some of those specialized strategies that are being used to ensure that, there isn't this disproportionality happening within our foster care system.
I'll jump in first, Nikki. So I think the reality is that there is disproportionality in child welfare. I think the very first thing that is really important is that we have to continue to talk about that. We have to utilize our data so we can see where we're seeing that disproportionality. And so at DCBS, we look at data at every critical decision point in a case. So we look at whether we are seeing disproportionality in the intake calls that we get. And the answer is that we do see that. So we see that from the very first call before DCBS ever even makes a decision about what to do with that information. We look at that in our determination as to whether that meets our criteria for DCBS to provide services. We look at that decision making after we have completed our assessment, when we're making a decision about whether we're going to substantiate maltreatment or not, whether we're seeing disproportionality in those decisions. We're looking at that at the decision point of whether a child enters care, whether we're seeing disproportionality at that decision point. We're looking at disparate outcomes for our youth in care in terms of whether there are differences with, by race and ethnicity with regard to reunification with the parent versus relative placement versus permanency through adoption, or whether we have more youth of color aging out of foster care without achieving permanency. So it's really important to look at that data to know what the data is telling us and what's really happening in the system, so that we can have meaningful conversations and develop actionable steps to take to address those issues. Another thing that we do is in several communities in the state, we have a race, community, and child welfare group that partners with DCBS representative and representatives in the community to develop those community level action steps that help to address the disproportionality and disparity that we see. And so we are hoping as part of a strategic plan that is currently underway at DCBS to expand those race, community, and child welfare groups to all regions within the state. They're not right now across the whole state. And so that's one of the things that we are working on right now. Equity is one of the 5 pillars that is a focus for DCBS currently. So we have a lot of other activities that we're doing, but those are some of the key ones that we are currently focusing on to look at disproportionality in our out-of-home care system.
And I'll jump in and piggyback from Aetna's perspective. We're utilizing that data that Christa has been discussing really to help decrease that overrepresentation, right, of our African-American children in the system. Some strategies that we're really looking at is how do we overcome some of these health system barriers, right, that limit the ability of this population from being able to receive services. And then how can we target or eliminate some of that interpersonal and institutional bias, right, that also results or prevents our population from obtaining necessary services. And we've got some targeted efforts to improve access to services for these youth. And that includes our care management team reaching out and helping to develop a priority provider initiative where we can help schedule, well child visits, dental visits, mental health care, and do that in an expedited fashion for our youth. But one thing that we're really passionate on, and I think really, leads into this conversation about preventing the disproportionality to begin with is our efforts to keep our children with their families. And one thing that we're rolling out in collaboration with DCBS, I use that word so much when we present on Sky, is on family finding. And that really is an innovative preventative practice where we're walking alongside DCBS and utilizing some child welfare experts, Kevin Campbell and Liz Wendell, to help expand, right, the use of this family finding initiative to help keep our youth from coming into care to begin with. And that may be somebody that's, their biological parents, or it could be expanding that network. And we also are working with older youth, utilizing HERO, which stands for helping everyone and each other out. And we're pulling our older youth into that initiative to help them identify who is their natural support system. And is that a relative? Is that fictive kin? Is that somebody that's really important from the school system, or even a former provider? And how do we engage those individuals with our youth so that they have that healing connection as we start to prepare them to transition out, because we know relationship and connection is so powerful and a powerful indicator for success as they transition out.
Nikki, I just want to drop just a little bit of information based off of what Christa and Kelly just talked about, the disproportionality. You know, that being said, what I want to bring to the table from my perspective as a foster parent, and I'm sure Christa and Kelly from her previous work could also support this, is that, you know, while we might have these larger populations of kiddos that are coming in, the important thing to also understand is while we need to address that, we also need to recognize the fact that we do not have the foster families for those kids all of the times either. So predominantly you're dealing, you know, you have folks who look like me, right? They're white foster families, and we do not have enough foster families for a lot of our highest needs, which is obviously older youth. But we also need, you know, we need families of color, we need Black families, we need Latinx families, we need everybody, because it's really important, I think, for kids to be able to land in a home where there isn't, you know, where somebody doesn't, you know, not look like them. That doesn't guarantee that it's going to be the right fit, obviously, but there's a real need. So I just want to say, if there's anybody on this call who is thinking about that, I think it was a Dave Thomas Foundation that did a study that said like 28% of Americans at some point have thought about fostering. So it's like, okay, so where are we losing them along the way? So if you're somebody who's thinking about that, and you don't have to jump right in and commit to fostering, there's different ways and levels that you can help youth and help people who are doing this work. So if you said, you know, maybe I'll just start off doing respite for somebody, you know, giving a foster parent maybe a break that they need. You know, that's a huge help for our system. So at any level that people can commit, I want to encourage people to do that. But we really do need non-white foster families. We need families that will take older youth, and we need families who will also open their homes to our LGBTQ community.
Thank you all for lifting up all those areas. I'm going to redeem myself. Disproportionality. There we go. You all did it so gracefully, so I get a chance to redeem myself. But thank you so much for bringing up and raising those issues. I want to stay with this a minute because we're going to be bold in these conversations. I want to ask everyone here on the panel to speak to the rural and the urban strategies. Sarah, you brought up that we need to stretch beyond and really seek those foster families of color and such, other populations and groups too. How does this look in a strategy for rural and urban communities in obtaining and recruiting foster parents for teens?
So one of the requirements of states is to have a diligent recruitment. It's called a diligent recruitment plan. And so states are required to strive to have the same diversity of foster families that reflects the diversity of pool of children that are in out-of-home care. So that is always a goal. As Sarah pointed out, it has been a struggle for my entire 24 plus years with the agency. It continues to be a struggle and a challenge. I'm sure it was a struggle before I got here. But one of the things that we are doing in terms of strategy is we actually have hired a couple of years ago a diligent recruitment specialist in our Division of Protection and Permanency in Frankfurt that focuses on nothing but recruiting foster families that are responsive to these needs that we know that we have. Some of the things that she has worked on is working with each region to develop a strategic plan for recruitment. So as you pointed out, how you approach that in an urban area is very different than how you approach that in a rural area. And so that those regional plans are intended to be responsive to the specific needs of that region, looking at the out-of-home care population in that region and the needs of youth there that need a foster home, but also really specific to the resources in that region that can, and partnerships and stakeholders that can be leveraged to support our recruitment efforts. So there are specialized strategic plans for each region of the state to keep in mind the differences between rural and urban.
I I think too, Nikki, I mean, this right here is a strategy, right? Bringing all of the advocates here in this space together to have these conversations is an excellent part, an important part of the process, right? To hear from Sarah, to hear from Christa. So folks in the community really understand what our pain points are and what our plans are to address that. I think this right here is just an amazing strategy. Just wanted to call that out. I think too, as Christa mentioned, leveraging resources, right? We want to be leveraged at Aetna to help facilitate conversations in rural areas or urban areas to really, again, understand what are those pain points, what's preventing somebody from making that commitment to becoming a parent, and what's our role in that? How can Aetna help? Is it that parents need additional training and support? We're ready to come and leverage our resources to provide additional training. Is it access to services, right? In rural areas, we know there's some access issues with getting needed behavioral health issues. And so how can we leverage a managed care partner to come in and help to address some of those barriers that we have that I really think prevent folks from taking that next step in the process.
Yeah, I want to weigh in with one more thought when we talk about, because we're talking about strategy and what's really needed, and somebody was kind enough to put a question in the box that I think ties really well into what we're talking about, and something that I have been really vocal about in the past, which is there any thoughts about professional parents for extreme need kids, paying them enough so that they don't have to work outside of the home and can concentrate solely on kids. So I think when we're talking about strategy, we have to sometimes get down to brass tactics, and money is always going to come into play. So, when people ask about me, they ask me particularly about fostering and what, a lot of people are really just uneducated about what goes into that and what sort of things that come out of my pocket and what sort of things get covered for kiddos. And so I just want to take a minute to mention at this time that, kids, their health insurance is picked up. We've got Aetna on the call. They are the contract for all kids that are in care through foster care or through the juvenile justice system currently. There is a per diem that is supposed to help with the care of those kids. And I will say something that I think we need to be talking about it as a community is the disparity and the rates of that per diem depending on what agency you're working with. So I'm all about let's have transparency and equity and equitable pay for these kiddos, so that one kid, if they're with a particular agency and somebody is receiving $80 a day to help take care of that kiddo, they might be able to do a lot more things for that kiddo than somebody who is with the state or a different agency and making a much lower rate. And we're talking sometimes 3-4 times a difference. But I have often said, while I don't think anybody should be doing, this work for the money, because that money is set for the kiddos, we also have to be really realistic about what the needs are for kiddos and what that's going to take from parents. So like anybody who's ever parented, and especially if you just did it in a pandemic and we're still doing it, it's really hard. And I've never had a kiddo hit my home that I didn't spend at least the first 2 to 3 months pretty much, on a full-time basis as much as I could, trying to remediate, needs, trying to, go make up those dental appointments that maybe haven't had, they haven't had done in a couple of years, just all sorts of things, mental health, physical health, kids that show up to my home and they have no clothes. Maybe just what's on them, or maybe sometimes a small bag. Tracking down, all this, paperwork that typically doesn't come up, with kiddos, like little important documents that you might need, like a birth certificate or an immunization and things like that. And that takes a lot of time. And I think it's important that we really think bigger and bolder about what if we could pay somebody a living wage so they did not have to work outside of the home. So I did work outside of the home until recently, and I have, for personal reasons, taken a break so that I can concentrate just on my family. But I think that's a really important conversation that we need to be having. To be able to have a dedicated parent who can stay home because they're not having to try to work at the same time could really open up, people to maybe take older kiddos or younger kiddos, or kids that might be medically complex, or kids that behaviors, even though they might be of a certain age and you think I can leave this kiddo at home, maybe you can't. So it would give us a lot more flexibility. And so I just wanted to take a moment to pause and plant that seed with everybody on the call.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Eltuan, oh, yes.
Yes, no, I was just going to follow up with along with what Sarah was speaking on, and also the question in the chat. It'll be easier, I think. We're looking for more foster homes for young people, and there's the narrative that our older youth are just a little more difficult, and I just think that that's not necessarily true. I think everyone could just use a conversation, a sit-down conversation, so to be able to create a process where that happens, or connection where that happens. So I'm thinking it could be very helpful to connect youth to youth development focused organizations that exist. My experience in foster care wasn't much of that. I was just in the home or at a doctor's appointment or at the nonprofit foster agency when the parent was doing training for the agency or out at work or respite care. And I don't think those are very productive environments. The latter being a youth development focused organization. And that speaks to the disparities in their education and youth, in their mental health development.
Yeah, and Eltuan, I was actually going to ask you too, just kind of to elaborate a little bit more on what you were speaking of. You know, how do parents, potential foster parents, develop some relationships, you know, with our teens and our older youth? Right now, there's a variety of options. We certainly, has been stated, want to build out what some of those foster homes look like. But in the meantime, for anyone who is a foster parent, anyone who's thinking of becoming a foster parent, what are some of your suggestions to build a relationship, no matter what child, you know, is coming into your home? How do you think that could look for our families?
I think just to have that compassion that I mentioned earlier and to be open and understanding. I don't think that you'll be able to be compassionate without being open and understanding to the needs of the young person. I think you'll be able to talk with them a lot easier if you're able to come from a more compassionate, understanding place. And this is how you just build relationships with people. Our young people in the foster system have gone through so much, not to say that they're alone in that, but not having the proper help and having walls built up all the time. It's just, they're gonna need somebody to talk to, and somebody that can just sit down and be like, hey, how's your day today? You know, like just talk to the young people, and let them know that you're there, and let them know that you support, and let them know that if they need anything, that you'll do what you need to do to make sure that they have what they need, and push them to make those positive choices. Show them that this positive option exists versus the latter. Maybe give them a little bit of your experience, but let them live their life supportively.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing your lived experience to this conversation. I think it's very valuable. I'm going to have this open to the panel. Will be our last discussion point. We've heard so many advocacy pieces today. We've heard experiences that are personal. We've heard broadly what our systems are doing. So we're leading up to the 2022 legislation session. What are some policies and budget priorities that we really need to invest in? Where do we need to advocate? Where are those areas?
Prevention, 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 I would say. And I think Christa, Sarah, any of us that are on here knows that's really a priority from a federal level and a state level as we're implementing Family First and really expanding access, right, to those additional dollars to open up programs that prevent our youth from having to come into the system. And then if our youth are going to come into our system, what are those investments that we need to make sure that we're able to take the best care of our youth that are here. And so I think looking at some adaptive parenting programs that may be necessary for foster parents who are taking in older youth, right? I think looking at evidence-based programs to equip our families so that they are skilled and feel confident, and to Eltuan's excellent point, are able to be that compassionate caregiver and be able to build that trusting relationship, because relationship and that connection is really at the heart of, I think, healing for all of our youth that are in care.
Prevention was at the top of my list too. So just to reiterate what Kelly said, I know that we have heard from a number of youth with lived experience that had there been more robust prevention services on the front end, perhaps they would never have had to enter care, would not have had the experiences that they had in care. I also just want to, I guess, add an additional comment to what Eltuan said. I think there is a misconception that teens are harder to foster. And that is, I think, from my perception, absolutely not true. Teens sleep through the night. They are very self-sufficient. So if it were up to me and if I were able to foster, I would pick a teen all day long over a younger child. I think sometimes maybe intimidation is that a lot of those who are interested in foster care have no parenting experience or only have parenting experience with younger children. So, they're a little bit intimidated by the unknown. The other thing that I would add in terms of policy needs is that we have at both at the federal and state level, a lot of resources available for youth who transition out of care without achieving permanency. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes that's a disincentive for youth to either return to their parents or to achieve permanency through adoption. And not that every older youth needs or wants to be adopted necessarily, and their voice is always of primary importance. But I am concerned at times that sometimes we are disincentivizing permanency. And I think the reason that is a really important conversation is exactly what Eltuan and Kelly have talked about, is that relationship is so important. And so we focus really hard with our older youth on giving them life skills, how to find a job, how to manage finances. And those skills are all really important. But in a birth family outside of foster care, those are skills that you learn in your home. And when you're 25, 35, or even 45, you still need that person that you're going to reach out to when you are stressed out, when you're challenged. And so having that permanency of relationship, whether that's legal permanency or not, is really important. And I think that we need to do more to ensure that happens, and ensure that we are not disincentivizing that relational permanency for our youth who are leaving care, because that support system is the most important thing that we can give them into their adulthood.
I would like to mention, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Nikki.
No, please, Eltuan, share. Thank you.
I love that you all mentioned prevention, and I'd like to look at education as a form of prevention. I mentioned the Love Notes training that we facilitate here in Kentucky. And with that training, that Love Notes training is an educational tool for the young people to make those positive choices that I had also mentioned earlier. And to just gives them the option to choose differently when it comes to their relationships and make more positive choices. There's an example of education for prevention. And looking at things like that, we have education for mental health, disaster prevention, and suicide awareness. We have education for prevention for prevention, but to actually start using those in practice, and foster parents being trained on this new data and the new findings, and also the need to hear more from youth voices as well can help us be more effective in our prevention.
Nikki, I'll jump in just with a couple of things. Obviously, prevention was at the top of my list as well. You know, I've had kiddos, if I'm being real frank and honest here, which I don't know any other way to be, I've had kiddos in my home where I'm like, you should have never been in care to begin with, right? This was a whole nother issue, right? This was a, you got brought into care because you were out of school and you were being bullied and your mom was trying to get you moved and they couldn't make that happen. So you did what you felt like it was in your best interest for your child, and you tried to bring that child home to homeschool that child, and maybe you didn't have the means to be able to do that, but this could have been resolved a different way, right? I've had a couple of those situations where it's like, no, they needed something else. And instead they got, you know, removed for other reasons. Not to say that there might not have been other issues at the table with that particular case. You know, that family was also living in poverty, and that mom was, you know, was working a job really, you know, really hard to try to make sure they could make ends meet. But again, let's not take people's kids away from them because they're in poverty. Let's get people out of poverty. So I think there's a lot of issues that we need to come at. But, you know, as far as, you know, other needs, you know, for this area in our community, we need to be able to invest in our social workers just as much as we do our foster parents. So I'm always going to talk about foster parents because that's the chair that I sit in, but I can tell you there, you know, it is problematic where we are working from a social services perspective. You know, it's a rotating door for kiddos of adults coming in and out of their lives. And so we need to be able to take this initiative extremely serious, and we need to be able to invest the money to hire and train the very best people and to keep them in their positions, and to not give them more cases than they can, you know, adequately manage. These are people, not just cases, right? These are children, these are people's lives. And we need people to be able to take the time that they need to make sure that those kiddos are getting what they, you know, what they need while they're in the system, and then supports for, you know, hopefully when they are no longer in the system. So, you know, we're probably never going to be Google as far as the benefits that we can give people and the, you know, the incentives, but we can definitely do better from where we are now. So I would say we need to be making a serious financial investment. And then also from the perspective of a foster parent, you know, I always say the tricky thing about fostering is that you have all the responsibility and no power. So specifically from an educational standpoint, so where my real passion is, you know, kids that are in care who have experienced trauma, and education, and where those two things intersect. So, you know, I've had kiddos who've come into my home and I'm like, oh, you need speech therapy, right? And so I can't just, you know, request that evaluation through that kiddo's school because I'm not the biological parent, you know? So while I'm not trying to take, you know, rights away from, you know, parents who have not had their rights terminated, I also think it's important to give the foster parents, the people who are playing, you know, that role day in and day out, and who are charged with, you know, overseeing that child well-being, some power. And I think that that's really problematic as far as from a retention standpoint as well. I've talked to a lot of foster parents who just, you know, there's too many issues, there's too many challenges, they don't feel like they have the support that they need, and they drop out. And I don't fault anybody for dropping out, because you have to do what's in the best interest, you know, for your own you know, family. I get that, but it's certainly not helping the kids that are stuck right in the system. So we need to be able to empower our foster parents to really play the role that we're asking them to do.
Well, I want to thank this panel for your time and for educating us and enlightening us today, and also for advocating for foster parents recruitment outreach for our teens and older youth. Carly Mosby Smith is going to close us out.
Thanks, Nikki. And thanks again to our panelists today. We really appreciate you all highlighting the importance of fostering teens throughout our state. We also want to thank Aetna Better Health of Kentucky for their support of today's Advocate Virtual Forum. Looking ahead to the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to skip next Wednesday as it's a holiday week. So hope you all enjoy the holiday. And we will be back on June 9th with a panel to discuss school districts' trauma-informed plans as required by the School Safety and Resiliency Act of 2019. As always, the follow-up email will include a recording of today's forum along with any of the resources that we mentioned or were dropped in the chat, and also a link to sign up for the June 9th forum. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.